The morning light filtered through my kitchen curtains, casting long shadows across the breakfast table, where I sat clutching my coffee mug with trembling hands. The ceramic felt cold despite the steam rising from the dark liquid inside. My reflection stared back at me from the black surface of my phone screen, which had been silent for 3 days now. 3 days since the words that shattered my world had echoed through this very room. "I hope you die alone, Mom. You don't deserve to have family around you." The memory of my son's voice, sharp with hatred I never knew he harbored, made my chest tighten. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the pancakes I'd been making when he stormed out. The batter now hardened and cracked in the bowl I hadn't found the strength to wash. Dust motes danced in the sunbeam that illuminated the empty chair where he used to sit every Sunday morning, reading me funny articles from his phone while I cooked. Before we dive into this unbelievable tale, please like and subscribe. I read every comment, so tell me where you're from. Because what I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Carmen Martinez. I'm 57 years old, and until last Tuesday, I believed I was a good mother. I thought I'd raised my children with love, sacrifice, and the kind of steady presence that builds strong families. The laugh lines around my eyes and the gray streaks in my dark hair felt like badges of honor, proof of years spent worrying about school projects, celebrating graduations, and staying up late waiting for teenage curfews to be met. But apparently, I was wrong about everything. The person who delivered this devastating blow was my youngest son, Diego Martinez, 28 years old, with the same stubborn chin I see in my mirror every morning and his father's intense brown eyes. Diego had always been my sensitive child, the one who brought me dandelions as a boy and called me every Sunday as an adult. He worked as a graphic designer downtown, lived in a small apartment 15 minutes away, and until this week, I would have sworn he was my closest confidant. The morning he exploded at me, Diego had arrived at my house in Riverside with his jaw set in a way that reminded me of his teenage years. His usually carefully styled black hair was disheveled, and his designer jacket wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. The scent of his cologne, usually subtle, seemed overpowering in my small kitchen, mixing unpleasantly with the vanilla candle I'd lit to make the house feel welcoming. "We need to talk," he'd said, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. The way he refused to meet my eyes should have been my first warning. My husband, Roberto Martinez, 59, had been in the garage tinkering with his woodworking projects when Diego arrived. I could hear the faint whir of his saw through the walls, a comforting sound that had provided the soundtrack to our 32-year marriage. Roberto, with his patient demeanor and steady hands that could fix anything, had always been the calm center of our family storms. His graying beard and kind smile had a way of diffusing tension, and I found myself wishing he would come inside and help me understand why our son looked at me like I was a stranger. The third person who would become crucial to unraveling this nightmare was my dearest friend and neighbor, Patricia Gonzalez. At 54, Patricia had been my confidant for over a decade, ever since she moved into the blue house across the street, with its perfectly manicured roses and cheerful yellow shutters. She had a way of appearing with fresh coffee and wise advice whenever life got complicated, her silver-streaked curls bouncing as she gestured emphatically during our long conversations on her front porch. That morning, as Diego paced my kitchen like a caged animal, I had no idea that Patricia would become my lifeline in the days to come. All I knew was that something had shifted in my relationship with my son, something that made him look at the family photos on my refrigerator with disgust instead of warmth. "Mom," Diego had said, finally stopping his restless movement to face me directly, I know what you did, and I can't pretend anymore that you're the person I thought you were." My heart had started pounding then, a sick rhythm that made me feel dizzy. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm, despite the cool October morning outside. The familiar sounds of my neighborhood, children walking to school, cars starting up for the morning commute, seemed to fade away as I focused on my son's face. "Diego, I don't understand. What are you talking about?" He'd laughed then, but there was no humor in it. The sound was bitter and sharp, like glass breaking. "Of course you don't understand. You probably don't even remember, do you? It was just another day for you, but it destroyed someone's life." I remember sinking into my kitchen chair, the same wooden chair Roberto had made for me 15 years ago, worn smooth by years of family meals and homework sessions. The floral cushion I'd sewn myself suddenly felt lumpy and uncomfortable, as if even my own home was turning against me. "Please," I'd whispered, "just tell me what's wrong. Whatever it is, we can fix it." That's when Diego's face had hardened completely, transforming my gentle son into someone I didn't recognize. The morning light streaming through the window illuminated the anger in his features, casting shadows that made him look older, crueler. "There's no fixing this, Mom. What you did 28 years ago finally caught up with you. And now, everyone's going to know exactly who you really are." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire, acrid and suffocating. I could hear Roberto's saw still buzzing in the garage, oblivious to the destruction happening just yards away. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, and my hands were shaking so hard, I had to set it down before I dropped it. 28 years ago? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Diego, what could I have possibly done when you were just born?" And that's when the pattern snapped into place. Diego reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. His hands were steady as he unfolded it, while mine continued to tremble uncontrollably. "This is a copy of a police report," he said, his voice cold and measured. "Filed on March 15th, 1996. The same week I was born, Mom. The same week you were supposedly focused on nothing but your newborn baby." I stared at the paper in his hands, unable to make out the words from across the kitchen table. The official letterhead was visible, but everything else blurred together through my tears. "Where did you get that?" I managed to ask. "Does it matter? What matters is what's written here." Diego's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion he'd shown since delivering his devastating pronouncement. "A hit-and-run accident. A 17-year-old girl walking home from her job at the grocery store. Left bleeding on Maple Street while the driver fled the scene." The kitchen walls seemed to close in around me. Maple Street. I knew that intersection well, had driven through it thousands of times over the years. But 28 years ago, that night in March? "Diego, I don't remember any accident. If someone was hurt, if there was an investigation, wouldn't I have known about it? Wouldn't everyone in town have talked about it?" He laughed that bitter laugh again, and I could see Roberto's stubborn streak in the set of his jaw. "That's the thing about small towns, isn't it? People forget. Life moves on. But some people never get to move on." The sound of Roberto's saw had stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Who was she?" I whispered. "The girl who was hurt?" Diego's composure finally began to crack. His voice became thick with emotion. "Her name was Sarah Martinez. She was saving money for college, working evenings at Morrison's Market. She had dreams, Mom. She was going to study to become a teacher." I closed my eyes, searching my memory desperately. Sarah Martinez. The name was familiar, but like an echo from a long-ago conversation. Diego, even if there was an accident, why are you so certain that I— Because witness reports described a blue sedan leaving the scene. You drove a blue sedan then, Mom. The same car you kept until I was in high school. My breath caught in my throat. I had driven a blue sedan, a 1994 Honda, that Roberto had helped me pick out just months before Diego was born. We'd chosen it specifically because it was safe and reliable for a new mother. Lots of people drive blue sedans, Diego. That doesn't mean— The witness also got a partial license plate number. Diego's voice was barely above a whisper now. 3 digits. The same 3 digits that were on your license plate. The coffee mug slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the kitchen floor, sending brown liquid splashing across the tiles Roberto had installed himself. Neither of us moved to clean it up. That still doesn't prove anything, I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Partial plate numbers, car colors, these things aren't definitive proof. You're right, they're not. Diego folded the paper carefully and put it back in his jacket. But I know you, Mom. I've watched your face during this entire conversation, and right now, you're not denying it because you know it's impossible. You're denying it because you're scared it might be true. I wanted to protest, to insist on my innocence, but the words died in my throat. Because somewhere, in the deepest corner of my memory, something was stirring. A flash of headlights, the sound of impact, a moment of panic and fear. The kitchen door opened and Roberto walked in, wiping his hands on an old towel. He took one look at the broken mug, my tear-stained face, and Diego's rigid posture, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. What's going on in here? I could feel the tension from the garage. Diego stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Ask Mom. Ask her about March 15th, 1996. Ask her about Sarah Martinez. Roberto's face went pale. He dropped the towel and looked from Diego to me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Roberto? I whispered, seeing something in his expression that made my blood run cold. Roberto, do you know something about this? But before he could answer, there was a sharp knock at the front door. Through the kitchen window, I could see Patricia's familiar silhouette on my front porch. But she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a woman I didn't recognize, someone who looked to be in her 40s with dark hair, and Roberto's same concerned expression. Diego saw them too, and his face hardened again. Looks like it's time for the truth to finally come out. The knock came again, more insistent this time. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stared at Roberto, whose face had gone ashen. The silence in the kitchen stretched between us like a taut wire, broken only by the steady drip of spilled coffee hitting the floor. Roberto, I said again, my voice barely a whisper. What do you know about this? He opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes darting between Diego and me. His hands were shaking now, the confident man who had been working in the garage just moments ago, replaced by someone who looked cornered and afraid. Mom, are you going to answer the door? Diego asked, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. Because if you don't, I will. Diego, wait. I held up my hand, trying to buy time to think. My mind was reeling, fragments of that night in 1996 starting to surface like debris from a shipwreck. The rain had been coming down hard. I had been driving home from my evening shift at the diner, exhausted and worried about the bills piling up on the kitchen counter. Diego had been just 3 years old then, and Roberto was working double shifts to make ends meet. The knocking stopped, and I heard Patricia's voice through the door. "Margaret, I know you're home. We need to talk." Roberto finally found his voice. "Margaret, maybe you should tell Diego the truth. All of it." "What truth?" I snapped, turning on him. "What truth, Roberto? Because right now I'm starting to think everyone knows something I don't." "That's not what I meant." Roberto ran his hands through his graying hair. "I meant about that night. About what happened after." Diego stepped closer to both of us, his jaw set in determination. "After what? Mom, what happened that night?" The memories were coming back now, unbidden and unwelcome. The impact, the moment of shock when I realized what had happened. But mostly, I remembered the fear. The overwhelming, paralyzing fear of losing everything I had worked so hard to build. "I remember driving home," I said slowly, my voice sounding distant even to myself. "It was raining, I was tired, and there was this moment where—" I stopped, pressing my hand to my forehead. "I don't know. It happened so fast." "What happened so fast?" Diego's voice was gentler now, but still insistent. Roberto moved closer to me, and for a moment I thought he was going to offer comfort. Instead, he looked at Diego with an expression I couldn't read. "Your mother came home that night in a panic," he said quietly. "The front of the car was damaged. She was crying, shaking. She told me she thought she might have hit something, but she wasn't sure." "Roberto!" I stared at him in shock. "You promised we would never talk about this." "What do you mean, something?" Diego's voice was rising again. "You mean someone. You mean Sarah Martinez." I felt the walls of my carefully constructed life crumbling around me. "I don't know what I hit. That's the truth, Diego. I never knew for certain." "But you suspect it." It wasn't a question. I nodded slowly, tears streaming down my face. "I suspected, but I was terrified. I had you to think about, and Roberto, and we were barely scraping by as it was. I couldn't afford a lawyer, couldn't afford to lose my job, couldn't afford to go to jail and leave you without a mother." Patricia's voice came through the door again. "Margaret, please, open the door." "We're not going away." Diego looked toward the front of the house, then back at me. "How long have you known about this article, Mom? How long have you been carrying this around?" "I didn't know about the article until you showed it to me just now." "But the guilt?" I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. "I've been carrying that for 27 years. Roberto stepped forward and, to my surprise, put his hand on my shoulder. "She wanted to go to the police the next day. I was the one who talked her out of it." Diego's head snapped toward Roberto. "You what?" "I was young and stupid and scared," Roberto said, his voice heavy with regret. "I told her we should wait and see what happened, see if anyone came forward. When no one did, when there were no police at the door, I convinced her that maybe she had just hit a pothole or some debris in the road." "But you both knew that wasn't true," Diego said, looking between us with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "We wanted it to be true," I said quietly. "We wanted it so badly that we almost convinced ourselves it was." The knocking started again, and this time Patricia called out, "Margaret, I can hear you talking in there. Please, just open the door. Let's talk about this like adults." Diego looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that looked almost like pity. "Mom, you need to answer that door." "I can't," I whispered. "I'm not ready for this." "You've had 27 years to get ready. Diego said, but his voice was gentler now. That little girl's family has been waiting for 27 years for answers. Don't you think they deserve to know what happened? Roberto squeezed my shoulder. He's right, Margaret. We should have done this a long time ago. I looked at both of them, these two men who had been the center of my world for so long, and realized that everything was about to change. Whatever came next, whatever happened when I opened that door, nothing would ever be the same. But as I walked toward the front door on unsteady legs, with Diego and Roberto close behind me, I realized that maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Maybe it was time to stop running from the truth. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, knowing that on the other side waited Patricia, and whatever consequences I had been avoiding for more than half my life. I turned the doorknob and opened the door just a crack, enough to see Patricia standing on my front porch. She looked older than I remembered from the grocery store, her face lined with exhaustion and something deeper, something that looked like the same kind of weight I had been carrying all these years. "Hello, Margaret," she said quietly. "May I come in?" I wanted to say no. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to slam the door shut, to pretend this wasn't happening. But Diego's words echoed in my mind about the family waiting 27 years for answers, and I found myself stepping aside. Patricia walked into my living room and looked around, taking in the family photos on the mantel, the comfortable furniture, the life I had built on top of my secret. Her eyes lingered on a picture of Diego at his high school graduation, and I felt a sharp stab of guilt knowing she would never have those moments with Emily. "You have a beautiful home," she said, but there was no malice in her voice, just sadness. Diego and Roberto stood near the kitchen doorway, uncertain whether to stay or give us privacy. I was grateful they were close. I didn't think I could face this alone. "Patricia, I don't know what to say," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "You could start with the truth," she said, settling into the chair across from my couch. "I've read that article dozens of times since it came out yesterday. The timeline matches, the location matches, and when I saw you at the grocery store last week, something about your reaction told me you knew exactly who I was." My legs felt weak, and I sank onto the couch. "I did know. I've known for years. I used to see you at Emily's grave sometimes, and I wanted so badly to say something, but I didn't know how." "You went to her grave?" Patricia's voice cracked slightly. "Every year, on the anniversary. I would wait until I was sure no one else was there, and I would bring flowers. White daisies. They were her favorite, weren't they? I remembered that from the newspaper articles." Patricia nodded, tears starting to fall. "She used to pick them in our backyard and make little bouquets for the kitchen table." The silence stretched between us, heavy with grief and guilt, and all the years of unspoken truth. I could feel Diego watching me, could sense his struggle between disappointment in what I had done and his desire to protect his mother. "Tell me what happened that night," Patricia said finally. I closed my eyes and let myself go back to that terrible evening. Roberto and I had been at a wedding reception. We weren't drunk, but we had been drinking. I was driving because Roberto had had more than me, but I should never have gotten behind the wheel. "Mom," Diego said softly, but I held up my hand. I needed to get this out. It was raining, and the roads were slick. I was driving too fast for the conditions, trying to get home because Roberto had work early the next morning. When I came around that curve on Maple Ridge Road, I saw something in my headlights, but it was too late to stop. Patricia's face had gone pale, but she didn't look away from me. I felt the impact. I knew I had hit something, someone. Roberto was asleep in the passenger seat, but the sound woke him up. I pulled over, and we both got out to look. My voice broke, and I had to take several deep breaths before I could continue. Roberto moved closer, standing behind the couch where I was sitting. She was so small, I whispered, so broken. I knelt down beside her and checked for a pulse, but there was nothing. She was already gone. Why didn't you call for help? Patricia asked, her voice hollow. I wanted to. I started to reach for my phone, but Roberto stopped me. He said it was too late to help her, and calling the police wouldn't bring her back. He said it would only destroy our lives too. I looked over at Roberto, who was staring at the floor. He was trying to protect me, but I should have been stronger. I should have called anyway. We panicked, Roberto said, his voice thick with emotion. We made the worst possible decision in the worst possible moment, and there hasn't been a day since that I haven't regretted it. Patricia wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. Do you know what the hardest part has been? Not knowing. Wondering if she suffered. Wondering if someone could have saved her if they had found her sooner. She didn't suffer, I said quickly. I'm certain of that. The impact was instant. And she wasn't alone, Roberto added quietly. Margaret held her hand and said a prayer before we left. Diego, who had been silent through most of this exchange, finally spoke up. Mom, what happened to her bike? I looked at him, confused by the question. Emily's bike, he pressed. It wasn't found at the scene according to the article. The blood drained from my face as I realized what he was asking. We put it in the trunk of the car. Roberto said if we left it there, it would be obvious what had happened. But if it was missing, maybe people would think she had run away or been abducted. Where is it now? Patricia asked, leaning forward. Roberto and I exchanged glances. This was perhaps the most shameful part of our cover-up. We threw it in Miller's Pond that same night, I admitted. Roberto weighted it down with rocks so it would sink. Diego ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling to process everything he was learning about his parents. Jesus, Mom, do you realize what you put her family through? They probably spent years thinking someone had kidnapped her. We did, Patricia confirmed. For the first few years, I jumped every time the phone rang, thinking it might be someone demanding ransom or the police saying they had found her being held somewhere. It never occurred to me that it might have been an accident until much later. The weight of what we had done, the full scope of the pain we had caused, was crushing me. I had focused so much on my own guilt over Emily's death that I had never fully considered the additional torture we had inflicted on her family by making her disappearance a mystery. Patricia, I know there's nothing I can say that will make this better, I said, fresh tears streaming down my face. But I want you to know that Emily has been in my thoughts every single day for 27 years. I have wished 1,000,000 times that I could trade places with her. I don't want you to have died instead, Patricia said, surprising me. I want my daughter back, but I know that's impossible. What I want now is for the people responsible to face the consequences of their actions. The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. I looked at Diego, wondering if this would be the last conversation we would have as free people. Are you going to call the police? Roberto asked. Patricia studied both of our faces for a long moment. That depends, she said finally. On what? I asked. On whether you're finally ready to do the right thing yourselves. Patricia's words hung in the air like a challenge, and I felt the familiar weight of decision pressing down on me. The morning sun had shifted, casting long shadows across her living room, and I noticed how the light seemed to avoid the corner where I sat, as if even nature was judging me. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" Roberto's voice was steady, but I could see his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the armrest of his chair. Patricia stood up and walked to the window, her back to us as she gazed out at the street where her daughter had once ridden her bike, laughing and carefree. 27 years ago, you made a choice to protect yourselves instead of doing what was right. I'm giving you the opportunity to make a different choice now." Diego leaned forward, his journalist instincts clearly engaged. "You want them to turn themselves in." "I want them to tell the truth," Patricia corrected, turning back to face us. "The whole truth. To the police, to the media, to everyone who spent years wondering what happened to Emily." The room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls were closing in around us. I thought about the life I had built on this foundation of lies, the careful construction of normalcy that had taken decades to achieve. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering had been tainted by the secret we carried. "Mom," Diego said quietly, and something in his tone made me look at him more closely. His face had changed during this conversation, aged somehow, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time. "He's right, isn't he? Patricia, I mean. You can't keep living with this." Roberto shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Diego, you don't understand what this would mean. Your mother could go to prison. We both could. Leaving the scene of an accident, tampering with evidence, obstructing justice. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to some of these charges." "And what about what it means to keep living like this?" Diego's voice rose slightly, the first real emotion he had shown since we arrived. "What about what it's done to you, Mom? Do you think I haven't noticed how you've never been able to fully connect with anyone? How you flinch whenever someone mentions accidents or missing children? How you've spent your entire life acting like you're waiting for punishment?" His words hit me with unexpected force because they were true. I had been waiting, always waiting, for the other shoe to drop. Every knock at the door, every unexpected phone call, every time Diego had come home late as a teenager, I had wondered if this was the moment my past would finally catch up with me. "I've watched you live half a life," Diego continued, his voice breaking slightly. "And I never understood why until now." Patricia returned to her seat, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Emily was going to be a teacher," she said suddenly. She had already picked out the elementary school where she wanted to work. She used to practice lessons with her dolls, lining them up in rows and teaching them about dinosaurs and planets. The image she painted was so vivid, so heartbreakingly real, that I felt physically sick. This wasn't just about the girl who had died under the wheels of our car. This was about all the lives she would have touched, all the children she would have taught, all the joy she would have brought to the world. "She would have been 41 next month," Patricia added. "I still buy her a birthday cake every year. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't seem to stop." Roberto cleared his throat roughly. "Patricia, if we do what you're asking, it won't bring Emily back." "No," she agreed. "But it might finally let her rest, and it might finally let you live." I found myself thinking about the conversation I had had with Diego just days before, when he had accused me of not deserving family around me. At the time, his words had felt cruel and unfair. Now I wondered if he had somehow sensed the truth, if the weight of my secret had poisoned our relationship in ways I hadn't even recognized. "There's something else," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "Something I haven't told you." Roberto looked at me sharply, alarm flickering across his features. Carmen, don't. But I was done protecting him, done protecting myself. Roberto wasn't driving that day, I was. The silence that followed was deafening. Diego's face went completely white, and Patricia's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. What? Diego whispered. I was the one behind the wheel, I continued, the relief of finally speaking the truth almost overwhelming. Roberto was my boyfriend then, and when we realized what had happened, when we saw that Emily was... He told me to get in the passenger seat. He said that if anyone saw us, it would be better if they thought he had been driving. Roberto's head was in his hands now. Carmen, why are you doing this? Because I'm tired, I said simply. I'm tired of you carrying guilt that should be mine. I'm tired of living a lie. And I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions for me. Patricia was crying now, silent tears that seemed to come from some deep well of grief. All these years, she said. All these years, I imagined the person who killed my daughter, and I never once thought it might be another mother. The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud, and I realized that this was the moment everything would change. There would be no going back from this conversation, no pretending that we could return to the careful balance we had maintained for so long. So what happens now? Diego asked, his voice barely audible. Patricia wiped her eyes and looked directly at me. Now you have 24 hours to do what you should have done 27 years ago. If you don't, I will. The apartment felt suffocating after Patricia left. The four walls that had sheltered our family for 15 years now seemed to press inward, holding secrets that had finally escaped into the light. Diego sat on the couch where he had been when Patricia delivered her ultimatum, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. The late afternoon sun slanted through the living room window, casting long shadows that seemed to divide the room into before and after. Roberto moved to the kitchen and began making coffee with mechanical precision, the familiar ritual offering some anchor in the chaos. The sound of running water and the whir of the coffee grinder filled the silence, but even these everyday noises felt different now, charged with the weight of everything that had been said. 24 hours, Diego said finally, his voice hollow. What does that even mean? What exactly is she asking you to do? I lowered myself into the armchair across from him, feeling every one of my 63 years in my bones. She wants me to go to the police, to confess. After all this time? Diego's eyes were red-rimmed, and I could see him struggling to process everything he had learned. What would even happen? Can they still prosecute you for something that happened so long ago? Roberto returned from the kitchen, setting 3 steaming mugs on the coffee table with careful precision. There's no statute of limitations on vehicular manslaughter, he said quietly. Especially not if it was a hit and run. The coffee was too hot, but I wrapped my hands around the mug anyway, grateful for something to focus on besides the devastation in my son's eyes. Diego had always looked up to me, had always believed I was someone worth admiring. Now I could see him reassembling his entire understanding of who his mother was, and the process was clearly painful. I keep thinking about all the times we drove past that memorial, Diego said, his voice barely above a whisper. Remember? That little white cross on Maple Street with the flowers? You always slowed down when we passed it. Always. I did remember. For 27 years, I had slowed down every time we passed Emily's memorial, had felt the familiar clench of guilt in my chest, had whispered apologies that no one could hear. I couldn't help myself. I admitted. It felt like the least I could do. Roberto sat heavily in the remaining chair, looking older than I had ever seen him. Carmen, you don't have to do this. Patricia is grieving, but she has no proof. It would be her word against ours. Her word against yours, you mean? I corrected. You've been covering for me all these years. You've carried guilt that should have been mine alone. That was my choice, Roberto said firmly. I made that decision because I loved you, because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Diego looked between us, and I could see him trying to understand the younger versions of ourselves, the terrified 20-somethings who had made a split-second decision that would define the rest of our lives. Why didn't you just stop? He asked. When it happened, why didn't you stop and help her? The question I had asked myself 10,000 times over the years hit me like a physical blow. Because I was a coward, I said simply. Because I was 23 years old and drunk and scared, and when we saw that she wasn't moving, when we realized what had happened, I panicked. Roberto tried to convince me to call for help, but I was terrified. I kept thinking about my future, about college, about everything I would lose. So you let an innocent man take the blame instead, Diego said, but there was no anger in his voice now, only exhaustion. No one took the blame, Roberto said. We were never caught. We never reported it. Emily's death was classified as a hit and run, and the case went cold. But you knew, Diego said, looking at Roberto. All these years, you knew that every time Patricia looked at you, she was wondering if you were the one who killed her daughter. Roberto nodded, his face etched with years of carried pain. The not knowing was probably worse for her than the truth would have been. At least now, she has answers. I thought about Patricia's tears, about the way her carefully maintained composure had finally cracked when I told her the truth. For 27 years, she had lived with questions, with the terrible uncertainty of not knowing who had taken her daughter's life or why they had left her there alone. In some ways, my confession might actually be a gift, even if it didn't feel like one. What happens to our family if you do this? Diego asked, and I heard the frightened child he had once been in his voice. What happens to me? You'll be fine, I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. You're 30 years old, Diego. You have your own life. But you're my mother, he said, and his voice broke slightly. Even after everything I said to you the other day, even after all our fights, you're still my mother. I can't lose you like this. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 days ago, Diego had told me I didn't deserve to have family around me when I died. Now, faced with the possibility of losing me to prison, he was clinging to the relationship he had been so ready to discard. Roberto reached across the space between our chairs and took my hand. There's still time to think about this, Carmen. Patricia gave us 24 hours. We don't have to decide anything right now. But even as he said it, I could see in his eyes that he knew the decision had already been made. The moment I had spoken the truth aloud, the moment I had finally released the secret that had poisoned our lives for nearly 3 decades, there was no path forward except the one Patricia had laid out for us. The phone rang then, shrill and insistent in the heavy silence of the apartment. All 3 of us froze, staring at the device as if it might explode. On the 4th ring, Diego stood and answered it. Hello? His face went pale as he listened to whoever was on the other end. Yes, she's here. Can I ask who's calling? He looked at me with something approaching terror in his eyes. Mom, he whispered, covering the mouthpiece. It's the police. My heart stopped. The police, after 27 years, after 3 days of wrestling with Patricia's ultimatum, they were calling now. The timing felt like some cruel cosmic joke. "Tell them she's not available right now," Roberto whispered urgently, but I was already shaking my head and reaching for the phone. "No," I said quietly. "Give it to me." Diego hesitated, his hand trembling slightly as he held the receiver. "Mom, maybe we should wait. Maybe we should call a lawyer first." "Diego, give me the phone." He passed it to me with obvious reluctance, and I took a deep breath before speaking. "This is Carmen." "Mrs. Reyes, this is Detective Morrison with the city police. I'm calling about a vehicle registration inquiry. We have your 1995 Honda Civic listed as possibly being involved in a minor incident, and we're trying to track down some information for our records." I felt the blood drain from my face. My 1995 Honda Civic. The car I had traded in 6 months after Emily's death, claiming I needed something more reliable. The car that had a small dent in the front bumper that Roberto had never asked about, even though he must have noticed it. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "What kind of information do you need?" Roberto and Diego were watching me intently, Roberto's face grave with understanding, Diego's still confused, but growing more frightened by the second. "We're just trying to confirm some details about the vehicle's condition when you traded it in back in 1997. This is regarding a cold case we're reviewing." "Would you be available to come in and answer a few questions? Nothing urgent, but it would help us close out some paperwork." Patricia. She hadn't waited the full 24 hours after all. Or maybe she had simply decided that involving the police was the right thing to do, regardless of my decision. Maybe she had never intended to give me a choice at all. "Mrs. Reyes, are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here." I looked at Roberto, who was standing now, his hands clenched at his sides. I looked at Diego, whose face had gone from pale to ashen as he began to understand what this call meant. "When would you need me to come in?" "Would tomorrow morning work? Say 10 o'clock? Again, this is just routine follow-up on an old case. Nothing to worry about." Nothing to worry about. If only he knew that I had been worrying about this exact phone call for 27 years, that it had shaped every day of my life since that terrible night when I left Emily Rodriguez dying on the side of the road. "Tomorrow at 10, I repeated. "Yes, that should be fine." "Great, just ask for Detective Morrison when you arrive. The address is 1247 Central Avenue downtown, and Mrs. Reyes, if you have any documentation related to the vehicle trade-in, it might be helpful to bring that along." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Did I have documentation? I had kept every single piece of paper related to that car trade filed away in a box in my closet like evidence of my own guilt. Insurance papers, maintenance records, the trade-in paperwork where the dealer had noted the minor front-end damage in his assessment. "I'll see what I can find," I said. "Perfect. We'll see you tomorrow then. Have a good evening, Mrs. Reyes." The line went dead, and I stood there holding the phone for a long moment before Diego gently took it from my hands and hung it up. "Mom," he said softly. What was that about? I sank back into my chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 58 years. That was about Emily Rodriguez. The girl Patricia mentioned? The one who died in the hit and run? Roberto sat back down beside me, and I could see him calculating, trying to understand how the police had connected me to that old case after all these years. "Carmen, how would they know to call you about a car you owned 27 years ago?" "Patricia," I said simply. "She must have given them my information." Diego was pacing now, running his hands through his hair in a gesture that reminded me painfully of his father. "But you said you were going to confess anyway. You said you were going to turn yourself in." "I was. I am." I looked up at him, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "This just means the timeline has changed. What are you going to tell them tomorrow?" That was the question, wasn't it? I could still lie. I could claim I didn't remember the car very well, that it was a long time ago, that I had no idea why my vehicle might be connected to a hit-and-run case. I could maintain the fiction that had protected me for nearly 3 decades. But sitting there in my living room, looking at my son's frightened face and my husband's resigned expression, I realized that the lies had already cost me everything that mattered. The truth might send me to prison, but at least it would finally set me free from the weight of carrying this secret. "I'm going to tell them what happened," I said quietly. Roberto reached for my hand again. "Are you sure? Once you say it, there's no taking it back." "I've been taking it back for 27 years, I replied. "Look where that's gotten us." Diego stopped pacing and turned to face me. "Mom, if you confess tomorrow, what happens next?" I looked at Diego's question hanging in the air between us, and for a moment, I couldn't find the words. What did happen next? I had been so focused on the decision to finally tell the truth that I hadn't fully considered the practical consequences. "I don't know exactly," I admitted. "I suppose they'll arrest me. There will be charges, a trial probably." "Prison?" Diego's voice cracked slightly on the word. Roberto squeezed my hand tighter. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We don't know what the statute of limitations is on this kind of case, or what evidence they actually have." "They have my car, Roberto." "The car that killed that girl." I said it plainly, without trying to soften it anymore. "And now they have me admitting I was driving it?" Diego sat down heavily on the couch across from us. "I can't believe this is happening. Yesterday morning we were arguing about Miguel not calling enough, and now you know why I've been the way I've been for all these years." I finished for him. "Why I've pushed everyone away. Why I've been so angry and bitter. I was protecting you from this, but I was also protecting myself." "That's not protection, Mom. That's just hiding." His words stung because they were true. "I know that now. I should have known it then." Roberto stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet street. "Carmen, if you're really going to do this tomorrow, we need to think about getting you a lawyer." "With what money?" I laughed bitterly. "We're barely keeping up with the mortgage as it is." "There are public defenders," Diego said quietly. "And maybe we can figure something out. I have some savings." I looked at my son with surprise. "Diego, no. You're not spending your money on this." "Why not? You're my mother. This family has been broken for years because of this secret, and now we finally have a chance to fix it. I'm not going to let you face this alone." The irony wasn't lost on me. Just days ago, he had told me I deserved to die alone. And now, here he was offering to spend his savings on a lawyer for me. "I don't deserve your help," I said softly. "Maybe not," he replied, and his honesty hurt. "But you're going to get it anyway. That's what family does." Roberto turned back from the window. "Diego's right. We'll figure out the money somehow. But Carmen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I braced myself for whatever was coming. "That night, 27 years ago, were you drinking?" The question I had been dreading. The one detail I hadn't shared with anyone, ever. I closed my eyes and forced myself to answer. "Yes." The word fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through both of them. How much? Roberto's voice was barely above a whisper. 2 glasses of wine with dinner, maybe 3. I thought I was fine to drive. I felt fine. The justifications I had told myself for decades sounded hollow now. But when that girl stepped into the street, my reaction time? I couldn't stop in time. Diego put his head in his hands. Oh, Mom. I know how it sounds. I know what it makes me. I was crying again, but I forced myself to continue. I've replayed that night a million times, wondering if I would have been able to stop if I had been completely sober. Wondering if those few drinks cost that girl her life. Roberto sat back down beside me, and I could see him processing this new information, trying to reconcile it with the woman he had married, the mother of his children. "Why didn't you tell me this part before?" he asked. "Because it makes everything worse, doesn't it? It wasn't just an accident, it was negligence. It was me making a choice to drive when maybe I shouldn't have." "But you said you felt fine to drive?" "I did feel fine, but that doesn't matter now, does it? That girl is still dead, and I still ran away." The room fell silent except for the sound of my crying. I waited for one of them to get up and leave, to tell me that this was finally too much, that they couldn't stand by me through this. Instead, Diego looked up at me with tears in his own eyes. "Mom, you've been carrying this guilt for 27 years. You've been punishing yourself and all of us along with you. Tomorrow, when you tell the police the truth, that punishment might get a lot worse. Are you prepared for that?" I wiped my eyes and tried to compose myself. I have to be. I can't keep living like this, and I can't keep making you and your father live like this either. Roberto squeezed my hand again. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll face it together. All of us. Even if I go to prison? Even if you go to prison?" I looked at both of them, these 2 men who had every right to walk away from me and my mistakes, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. But as we sat there in the growing darkness of evening, none of us spoke about the phone call I would have to make tomorrow before going to the police station. The call to Miguel, to tell him that his mother was about to confess to killing someone 27 years ago. The call that might finally destroy what little was left of our family for good. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while Roberto slept fitfully beside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Miguel's face from our last argument, twisted with anger and disappointment. How do you call your son and tell him that everything he thought he knew about his mother was wrong? That she wasn't just distant and cold, but a killer who had been living a lie for nearly 3 decades? At 5 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen to make coffee. My hands shook as I measured the grounds, thinking about the conversation that lay ahead. Roberto found me there an hour later, sitting at the table with my phone in front of me, untouched. "You have to call him," he said gently, pouring himself a cup. "Miguel deserves to hear this from you before the police get involved." "What if he hangs up on me? What if he won't even listen?" "Then at least you tried to do the right thing." I picked up the phone and set it down again. "Roberto, what if this destroys him? He's finally getting his life together, and now I'm going to blow it all up." "You're not blowing anything up. You're trying to put the pieces back together after 27 years. Diego appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas. "Mom, I heard you moving around." "You didn't sleep, did you?" "Not much." I gestured to the chair across from me. "Will you sit with me when I call Miguel?" Diego nodded and sat down. Roberto took the chair beside him. Having them both there gave me the courage I needed to dial Miguel's number. The phone rang 4 times before he answered, his voice groggy. "Mom? It's barely 7 in the morning. What's wrong?" "Miguel, I need to talk to you about something important. Something I should have told you years ago." There was a pause. "Look, if this is about our fight the other day, I'm still not ready to. I killed someone, Miguel." The silence on the other end stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. "What did you say?" 27 years ago, before you were born, I was driving home from dinner with friends. I had been drinking. Not a lot, but enough. A girl ran into the street, and I hit her with my car. She died." "Mom, that's not... You can't be serious." "I am serious. And instead of calling for help, I drove away. I left her there and drove away." I could hear Miguel breathing heavily on the other end. This is why our family is so messed up?" "Yes. I've been living with this guilt for 27 years, and it's poisoned everything. It's poisoned my relationship with you, with your father, with Diego. I thought I was protecting all of you by keeping it secret, but I was just protecting myself." "Jesus, Mom." His voice cracked. "You've been lying to us our whole lives." "I have, and today I'm going to the police to tell them the truth. I wanted you to hear it from me first." The line went quiet again. I looked at Roberto and Diego, both of them watching me with worried expressions. "Miguel, are you still there?" "I'm here. I don't know what to say. This explains so much, but it also makes everything worse, you know? All those times I thought you just didn't care about us. You were actually carrying around this massive secret." I know how it sounds." "Do you? Because it sounds like my mother is a completely different person than I thought she was. It sounds like instead of just being emotionally unavailable, you're someone who killed a person and ran away." Each word felt like a physical blow, but I forced myself to listen. "You're right. You're absolutely right to feel that way. Are you going to prison?" "I don't know. Maybe. Probably." Another long pause. "And you're just telling me this now? Right before you destroy what's left of our family?" Diego reached across the table and squeezed my hand, giving me strength to continue. "Miguel, I'm telling you now, because I finally realized that keeping this secret was destroying our family anyway. At least this way, there's a chance we can start over with the truth." "Start over?" Miguel's laugh was bitter. "Mom, I told you the other day that I hoped you'd die alone. Now I find out you've been living with this for my entire life, and you think we can just start over?" My chest tightened. "I don't know if we can, but I had to try." "I need time to think about this. I need time to process what you just told me." "Of course. Take all the time you need." "Are Dad and Diego there with you now?" "Yes. They've known since yesterday." So, once again, I'm the last to know everything. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I set the phone down and buried my face in my hands. He hung up on me. Roberto moved his chair closer to mine. He's in shock. Give him time. What if he never speaks to me again? What if going to the police today means I lose Miguel forever? Diego looked thoughtful. "Mom, you lost Miguel a long time ago. Maybe this is the only way to get him back." 2 hours later, as I was getting dressed to go to the police station, my phone rang. Miguel's name appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped. "Hello?" "I'm coming with you," Miguel said without preamble. "What?" "To the police station. I'm coming with you. Dad texted me the address. I'll meet you there in an hour." Miguel, you don't have to. Yes, I do. If we're going to do this truth thing, if we're going to try to fix our family, then I need to be there. I need to see this through with you. I started crying again, but this time it wasn't from despair. Are you sure? I'm not sure about anything right now, Mom. I'm angry and confused, and I feel like my whole life has been a lie. But you're still my mother, and I can't let you face this alone. As I hung up the phone and finished getting ready, I realized that for the first time in 27 years, I wasn't facing the consequences of my actions alone. My family was fractured and hurt, but they were still my family. But as we prepared to leave for the police station, none of us knew that the hardest part wasn't going to be confessing to the police. The hardest part was going to be what Miguel would say to me after we left the station, when the weight of what I had done finally hit him completely. The police station parking lot felt surreal as we sat in Roberto's car, waiting for Miguel to arrive. Diego kept checking his phone while Roberto drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. I stared at the building's entrance, trying to prepare myself for what was about to happen. There he is, Diego said, pointing to Miguel's car pulling into a space near ours. I watched my older son walk toward us, his face unreadable. He was wearing the same clothes from yesterday, and I wondered if he had slept at all. When he reached our car, Roberto rolled down the window. You okay, mijo? Roberto asked. Miguel shrugged. Define okay. He looked directly at me for the first time. Are you ready for this, Mom? I don't think anyone's ever ready for something like this, I replied, but I'm grateful you're here. Don't thank me yet. I'm still processing everything you told me. We walked toward the entrance together, an awkward family unit held together by crisis and determination. Inside, the fluorescent lights felt harsh, and the smell of industrial cleaner made my stomach turn. At the front desk, I took a shaky breath. I need to speak with someone about confessing to a crime. The officer behind the desk looked up with mild interest. What kind of crime? A hit and run from 27 years ago. His expression changed immediately. Please have a seat. I'll get a detective. As we waited on hard plastic chairs, Miguel finally spoke. Mom, walk me through that night again. I need to understand exactly what happened. Roberto reached for my hand. Maria, you don't have to. No, it's okay. I turned to Miguel. I was 23, working late at the restaurant. It was raining, and I was exhausted. I was driving home on Maple Street when this man stepped into the crosswalk. I hit him. And you left? Miguel's voice was flat. I panicked. I was so scared. I drove home, and then I found out the next day that he had died. Did you know he had a family? My throat tightened. The news said he had 2 children. Miguel was quiet for a long moment. Those children grew up without their father because of what you did. Miguel, Diego said sharply. That's enough. No, let him talk, I said. He has every right to be angry. Miguel looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. I am angry, but I'm also trying to understand why you carried this alone for so long. Before I could answer, a detective appeared. I'm Detective Johnson. I understand you want to discuss a cold case? We followed him to a small interview room where I told my story again, this time officially. The detective took notes, asked questions about details I had tried to forget, and explained what would happen next. Given the time that has passed and your voluntary confession, the process will likely involve formal charges, but the court will take your cooperation into account, Detective Johnson explained. When we finally left the station 2 hours later, the sun was setting. We stood in the parking lot, nobody quite sure what to say. "Well," Roberto said finally, "it's done." Miguel looked at me, and I braced myself for his judgment. "Mom, what you did was terrible, and keeping it secret all these years was wrong too." I nodded, tears starting again. "But," Miguel continued, "watching you face this today, seeing you tell the truth even though it might cost you everything, I understand now why Dad and Diego want to stand by you." "Miguel, I'm not saying I forgive you yet. I'm not saying everything is okay between us." "But you're trying to make this right, and that matters." Diego stepped closer to his brother. "So what happens now?" Miguel was quiet for a moment. "Now we figure out how to be a family again. A honest family this time." As we prepared to leave the parking lot, Miguel called out to me one more time. "Mom, when I said I hoped you'd die alone, I didn't mean it. I was hurt and angry, but I didn't mean it." "I know," I replied, "and I understand why you said it." Driving home that evening, I realized that while my legal troubles were just beginning, something important had shifted in my family. The secret that had poisoned our relationships for decades was finally gone, and for the first time in 27 years, I wasn't carrying it alone. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least now we would travel it together, with truth as our foundation instead of lies.